Good evening. This is just a pre-introduction introduction. I blew it when I was going to introduce Brian this evening, and I mistook the title, When Living Humans Make Cells Explode. In any case, I'd like to introduce Ed Liebrich, because Ed Liebrich would like to say a few words, and I'd like to have him introduce Brian this evening. So let's have it for Ed. Got the fire extinguisher.
I really wasn't planning on this. I got a late notice on what I was supposed to do, and they gave me these notes.
Oh my!
Well, now I know about. I'd like to induce, yeah. our host for the evening, who needs no explanation, and so I don't need have to give him any explanation or any introduction. But if there are some new microscopists here pledging microscopists tonight, I'd like to let him know that he's a biologist, a microbiologist. He's a chemist. He's a microscopist. He's a licensed pilot. I don't know how many of you knew that. Certified scuba diver, and he's also an entertainment specialist. So let's honor. Let me tell you, he's written over 30 books. Now, how many of us here today have read 30 books from cover to cover? I wrote this morning. I changed my mind later on this morning. He's a complicated man. Now I'd like to introduce to you this evening, but none of you need his introduction. He needs no introduction at all. And so without further ado, I would say, here is Brian.
Thank you, Ed. Let's look at the title again, since the advance button was lent upon by the previous incumbent. To be introduced by someone I have known for so long and have respected so much is a great honour. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you also for keeping it short. I'm not going to make the same mistake with my talk. Now, whenever I give these, I always break some rule of speaking, like you mustn't have too many slides or you mustn't mix your media. There is one rule I've never broken, and that is the rule of keeping to time. It's supposed to be an hour, and an hour is what it's always been, except tonight. Tonight, we're going to go over time.
All right.
by 5 or 10 minutes. But we are going to go over time tonight. I didn't want to cut down the extracts of TV shows that I've got for you, because they're just too good. What we're going to talk about is this strange phenomenon of human spontaneous combustion. It's something which many people insist doesn't actually exist. And yet it's occurred over the centuries. And about 35 years ago, I realized that there is a mechanism that explains it. I never published it because I thought, well, two reasons. There were a couple of things I thought I won't publish till I'm in my 70s, because I didn't want to be trapped by being the guy who came up with this theory and detract from my normal work. But now I feel old enough to do it, and I'm amazed no one's come up with it before. And there is a great danger in science of thinking of some great idea and not realizing that any rational person has already thought of it. Well, these days we know whether that's true because you can go onto Google and you can do a keyword search, and if no one actually has thought of it, then you really have got a unique idea. And I'm amazed, as I think you will be, that nobody has ever come up with this before. To me, it's transparently obvious, but then I suppose most of the obvious things are so obvious that they do indeed skate past us. After last year's Intermicro, I heard that there was an inquest being planned in Ireland into a case of spontaneous human combustion. And the inquest took place last September. So it's only a matter of months ago. And the coroner's verdict was that Mr. O'Flaherty had died of spontaneous human combustion. No ifs, no buts, no, there's a possibility, but that was the cause of death. And since the matter had now been dignified by the courts, I thought, well, now would be a good time to look at it. Now, it often occurs on the news. Here is an American news broadcast about it. And people love to come up with their own theories. And sometimes they're scientists, sometimes they're journalists, sometimes they're program producers. But they never have thought it through. And they've never actually come up with an answer that fits all the facts. And this chap, Alex Jones, came up with a theory of his own, an idea that his dad gave him. Equally muddle-headed, no more muddle-headed than the others, but it's typical of the kind of things people have been thinking.
Welcome back. It's the second half of InfoWars Nightly News. I've always wondered, reading in different history books from around the world, what would it be like to spontaneously combust? This has happened in public. It happened in ancient times. Asians wrote about it. The ancients in Latin America and Mesoamerica wrote about it. There's famous cases in ancient Europe and even modern England. And there's a new report out on this where the coroner has found that nothing else was damaged in the house and that this gentleman reportedly spontaneously combusted and completely melted down. Sometimes they even burn holes in the floor. It's like the Wicked Witch or something, just explodes. First Irish case of death by spontaneous combustion. A man who burned to death in his home died as a result of spontaneous combustion. An Irish coroner has ruled. West Galway coroner, Dr. Syrian McLaughlin, said it was the first time in 25 years of investigating deaths that he had recorded such a verdict. My dad has pointed out that most lightning actually comes from the bottom up, from the ground up, and that it's an optical illusion that comes from the top down because it tends to ionize and energize as it goes up. Some lightning does go from the atmosphere down, and that it's probably people with static electricity or other earth events. You've seen trees hit by lightning that explode and are all charred and black and catch on fire. I know I've seen a big tree struck by lightning and catch on fire and burn. That's probably what's happening here. Is that, boom, lightning comes up, millions of volts, and you just explode. I don't know. Might be a good way to go. Certainly probably isn't very painful. In fact, from the eyewitnesses, you don't even have that much time to wonder why you're on fire. It's just, boom, you explode and almost nothing is left. So there's my theory.
I have to say that when you hear his mellifluous clarity, the ease with which he gets all the names, pronunciations correctly, and the fact that he realises that Ireland is part of England, you do wonder how the hell these guys get the job. I mean, there is nobody in this room as ignorant and subtly incoherent as this presenter on a news channel. Somebody, please, apply for the job. There are other occasions when, in more measured terms and with more accuracy, that the media have looked at this subject, and Hardcore History on the History Channel turned their attention to it a couple of years ago, and I'd like to show you a little bit of their historical summary because it's more succinct and more clearly put than I probably would have managed it myself.
The Bible in Leviticus tells of the sons of Aaron being consumed by a mystical blaze. Since the early 1800s, it's been called spontaneous human combustion, a mystery where the human body is reported to burn from the inside out, reducing it to ash while its surroundings are untouched. We'll investigate classic claims of spontaneous human combustion as we talk to veteran firefighters who remain perplexed by these unusual events. We'll explore curious cases, one where the victim was consumed in just 20 minutes. Another where a house painter from London describes witnessing a woman breathing fire. And we'll interview fire investigators who have their own theories about the origins of these fires that appear to burn from within.
Yes, it is an extraordinary phenomenon. It is quite ghoulish. and it's captivating. It has a sort of a visceral attraction to us, and it's been written about by many, many people. The first was Thomas Bartholin, who was in fact an expert microscopist himself. He was the first to publish detailed drawings of snowflakes, which were later stolen and reproduced by Robert Hooke, who himself always complained about plagiarism, but was in fact himself a plagiarist. He wrote about a woman in Paris who said she felt rather heavy and low in spirit and went to bed, and her maid turned up the next day to find that the bed, the centre of the bed, contained black ash. That was all that was left of her mistress, with her limbs sticking out. It is really interesting, and if you look back at some of these earlier writers, many of them were novelists. Dickens, as we'll shortly see, wrote about it, and so indeed did that noted American writer, Herman Melville. He had one of his characters destroyed by spontaneous human combustion. But the one who featured it most of all, most famously, was Charles Dickens in his novel Bleak House, and that was also part of this History Channel programme.
Charles Dickens, the beloved 19th century British novelist, is known for his many fine works, including A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations. In 1852, he wrote the novel Bleak House, which originally appeared in monthly installments. Bleak House depicts the poverty and hopelessness of the urban poor during the Industrial Revolution. At the time, public drunkenness was a problem, and temperance advocates wrote about terrifying cases of drunkards dying of spontaneous human combustion.
Temperance Society loved to cite these cases of alcoholics and drunks and people like that, and to try to convince the public that this boogeyman of spontaneous human combustion might get you. So you better quit drinking, and you better sober up and turn to religion. Dickens was so taken by this topic, and he thought it was a scientific fact, and so he chose in his great novel Bleak House to kill off the evil, sinister Mr. Crooks with the specter of spontaneous human combustion.
Are you there, Crook?
Dickens described Mr. Crook as continual in liquor. And in the December installment of Bleak House, he sends this sinful drunk to the devil in a fiery blaze. When the December 1852 issue came out, it caused quite a stir. Dickens was immediately confronted by his friend, the scientist, George Lewis. Lewis thought that spontaneous human combustion was an impossibility.
What Lewis was concerned about in the account of spontaneous combustion is that when such a powerful figure argues that something like spontaneous human combustion is possible, it will be believed by thousands and thousands.
Dickens shot back his response in the next installment of Bleak House. He inserted a long list of authorities who supported the possibility of spontaneous human combustion.
It's clear from some of the mistakes he makes in citing the cases and the particular cases that he cites that he got them all, or almost all of them, from one book in particular.
A popular medical text, The Anatomy of Drunkenness, was part of Dickens' library. In fact, all 30 cases that Dickens cites are from that text. Skeptics say this single source of information is not definitive proof of spontaneous human combustion.
What Dickens had done was in fact to sort of be so impressed by another publication that had brought together in The Anatomy of Drunkenness a number of cases that he sort of alluded to the fact that he knew of these cases almost as though he'd researched them himself. But in fact, he all got them from the one source. And notice already we've got drunkenness coming into it. Melville said that his character was heavy in drink, and Mr. Crook was said by Dickens to be a drunkard. Alcoholism and a kind of a moral overtone, almost as though God is destroying the inebriated through fire, is beginning to appear. And the relationship between spontaneous human combustion and culture remains to this day. For example, when Pink Floyd produced their album, Wish You Were Here, they had a guy on fire on the cover. Now, in the modern world, that would be a photoshopped image. Not then. There was no such thing. And the only way they could take the photograph was by actually setting a man on fire. These are two top Hollywood stuntmen, and originally they were photographed in the other position, and so the flames blew into the face of the other guy and singed off his eyebrows. Apparently that's the kind of occupational hazard that you suffer if you are a professional stuntman. So they changed places, and the reason for the burning was not so much an allusion to spontaneous human combustion, but it was a reference to the fact that you will get burned in the music industry if you deal with an unscrupulous publishing company or an unscrupulous manager. So it was really an allusion, you know, don't get burned, and that was the point of it. More recently, now that we do have digital imagery, there was a very nice simulation of a sort of exaggerated, immediate explosion of spontaneous human combustion in this rather nice little short digital clip. Here you see Gary Douglas posing, and suddenly with a startled expression, he just disappears in a flash of flame. Now you can see that quite clearly, but there's a mistake in there, because the flame is not only a source of heat, but a source of light. And in actual fact, if you look at the background when he's not burning, and compare it to the background when he is burning, it's the same. And that wouldn't be the case. So I've taken the trouble here to show you how it should have looked, because of course the flames would in fact have illuminated these otherwise dark lampposts and also illuminated the snowdrifts nearby. So next time that Mr. Douglas does it, he might like to treat the background as well as the figure in the foreground. The most interesting case in modern culture is Spinal Tap. Notice that Spinal Tap spelt their name in this idiosyncratic fashion where the N has an umlaut and the I doesn't have a dot. You don't get either of these in regular fonts, and I trust all of you are mindful of the enormous effort that I've gone to in order to do the job properly. But they, in a famous interview, explained how one of their number disappeared through spontaneous combustion. They later pretended that yet another one had, which was rather over-egging the pudding. And for those old people, almost of my advanced years, who don't know, Spinal Tap is a mythical group. It was a work of satire, and in this interview, this famous interview, you can see them all trying very hard not to laugh as they answer the serious question.
First drummer was
the Beeper. John Stumpy Pepys. Oh, yeah. Great, tall, blonde geek with glasses.
Yeah. Now, during the Flower People period, who was your drummer?
Stumpy's replacement, Peter James Bond. He also died in mysterious circumstances.
He exploded on stage.
Just like that?
He just went up.
He just was like a flash of green light, and that was it. Nothing was left.
It was his face.
Well, there was.
It's true. This really did happen.
There was a little green globule on his drum seat.
It's like a stain, really.
It was more of a stain than a globule, actually. And
dozens of people spontaneously combust each year. It's just not really widely reported.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I would bring in personal experience here, and I can vouch for the fact, having played keyboards in a rock and roll band for many years in the past, that I have also known drummers leave a small stain on their seat. They're ordinarily not through spontaneous human combustion. But there is a kind of a rock and roll connection. There is a behavioural sound at the back. There is a kind of a rock and roll theme running through much of this. And indeed, Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden presented a documentary on the subject, and here is the dispassionate and scientific way in which he introduced that programme.
In the last century, over 100 people have lost their lives in the most horrific circumstances. People turning into human fireballs in their own homes. Flames roaring out from their insides. Spontaneous human combustion. Could mysterious forces have caused victims to be consumed by flames emitted and sustained by their own bodies? I'm Bruce Dickinson, lead singer of Iron Maiden, and I don't buy supernatural theories. So I'm going to meet the people who have witnessed the flames firsthand.
He had a slit in his stomach, and the flames were coming out much like a blowtorch.
And through a series of elaborate and sometimes dangerous scientific experiments, I'm going to put the phenomenon to the test. Jolly good. I don't believe in science fiction. I do believe in science fact.
Now, already we're beginning to get some common denominators. Notice that a witness spoke of seeing flames come out from the body like a blowtorch. Hold that thought in your minds. And let's crank back the time to 1998, when the BBC put together an extremely well-edited, though extremely poorly based, documentary on the subject. This is the way it was reported at the time, that they were going to be doing a QED program on spontaneous human combustion. And I think you will agree with me that the way in which it's edited, the way the music features, is an admirable example of the way in which the BBC handles these programs at its very best.
January the 8th, 1988. A normal winter's evening with a light rain falling. Alfred Ashton had sealed his windows and locked his doors to keep out the cold, and settled down in front of the television. A neighbour had visited Mr. Ashton at around 6 o'clock to make his tea. He was the last person to see Alfred Ashton alive. Sometime during that evening, Mr. Ashton mysteriously caught fire.
I've been to many fatal fires over the years, but I've never seen anything quite like this. The only way I can explain it is to consider spontaneous human combustion.
The official verdict on these types of fire deaths is often left open. Many of the witnesses consider another, more bizarre explanation.
Remember, that's a quarter of a century old, and it's referring to episodes from 1988. It's a classy production, and you can see when you look at their interviews of the intensity, the disturbed psychology of those who witnessed the after effects of this episode.
HX Delta 3, over. I received a telephone call informing me that there was a fire. On my way to the fire, I received a radio message to say that it was a fatal fire.
Penny had been called to a terraced house in Southampton. The details of his extraordinary story have never before been told in public.
As I arrived on the morning of the fire, the first thing I was aware of was the extreme heat and smoke in the room. As I stepped into the room, I noticed the floor was very slippery. On looking around the room, I noticed that the windows were quite blackened by smoke, but they weren't broken. As the smoke began to clear, I realised that there was a hole in the floor, and across this hole was a body.
The way in which Mr. Ashton's body had been burnt was gruesome and puzzling. Only the legs and feet remained. The rest of the body was totally consumed.
What I found amazing about this fire was the complete devastation of the body. There was virtually nothing left. Alongside the hole was this electric fire, although it wasn't switched on at the time. On the other side was an anorak hanging on the back of the chair that was fairly close to the body, although it wasn't severely damaged by fire. It was just showed a little bit of heat damage at the base. On the chair alongside that was a pile of newspapers that, although they were brown from the smoke, they weren't damaged by fire. And also a television set on the worktop had the casing had completely melted. Looking at the body again, I noticed that the trousers, shoes and socks were not damaged at all. The cut-off point where the body had smouldered was a clean cut. Over the years, I've read and heard various things about spontaneous human combustion, and this obviously came to mind. A few days after the incident, I then went to the library and withdrew some books to look into the subject, and was amazed to find that everything that I'd witnessed in that room had been recorded actually in books.
And so we're getting yet again further pointers to what happens, the fact that the extremities, the legs, are often not damaged, that the body is completely destroyed, and that a lot of localized heat is produced. Not a lot of flame. that spreads in the sense that the newspapers on the chair alongside weren't burnt, or that the TV, made of thermolabile plastic, had slightly melted. Localized burning, and burning that destroys the core of the body. That's the picture we're beginning to get.
It appears as if the body has burnt from within without damaging the rest of the room, as one police officer discovered in a small living room in Wales.
I had never encountered spontaneous human combustion before I entered that room. Everyone, the police officers, superintendents, standing around, were absolutely dumbstruck, because they knew that what they were seeing was impossible. I was a scenes of crime officer in Blackwood, Gwent, in January 1980, and I received a call from the officers at Evervale requiring my presence at a house in Evervale at which there had been a death by fire. So I opened the door and immediately stepped into a different world.
The strange scene that Hamer was to discover on the other side of that door has been described in nearly all cases of spontaneous human combustion.
There was a weird orange-red glow throughout the room, and the atmosphere was very steamy and the walls were radiating heat. And the window had cracked with the heat, and both the window and the bare light bulb, of which the plastic shade had melted and fallen off, were coated in an orange-red substance which gave the reddish light. The television set just inside the door, the knobs had melted and oozed out of shape. There was a settee covered with loose drapes. They weren't even scorched. I looked around, and to my right, lying on the floor, on a carpet in front of an open coal fireplace which was out, was the remains of a man. The torso had been reduced completely to ash.
You notice again, the torso has been reduced completely to ash. There's no fire damage to the rest of the room, though there's enough heat to melt plastic components. Hardcore history also documented some cases more graphically, like the case of Mrs. Atsky.
The classic profile of an alleged spontaneous human combustion victim is an older woman who is overweight, alcoholic, and infirm. They are usually alone at the time of the event. In many ways, 51-year-old Beatrice Oski fit that profile. It was Thanksgiving weekend in 1979. Mrs. Oski kissed her son Frank goodbye and wished him a safe journey. Beatrice Oski struggled with a drinking problem. She was also handicapped, wearing a brace on her left leg. Years before, she had broken her ankle. Because she was a diabetic, it had never healed properly. Despite these problems, her son didn't worry about leaving her alone.
She was not scared to be alone. You know, she was a fairly brave woman, really. She just had that. She had one fear, and that was a fire.
The next morning, Shelley Oski, Frank's ex-wife, came to pick up some belongings from the Oski home. Knowing Beatrice was handicapped, she waited patiently for the door to be answered. But at a certain point, Shelley became concerned and let herself in.
Mom?
She smelled smoke and called out for her mother-in-law.
Mom?
When there was no answer, Shelley became frightened and called the fire department. As seen in this actual photo, the paramedics were confused by what confronted them.
It took a few minutes to actually digest the whole picture that there was a person actually sitting in the chair who had died.
Lieutenant Daryl Hafner arrived on the scene.
We didn't really know what we had sitting down there on the floor, whether it was a pile of papers, a bag of garbage, and we really had to stand back and get our senses together and say, what is this? And then I noted a foot, and I think there was a brace on one leg, and I thought, this has got to be a person.
The area from above Mrs. Oski's knees was burnt away, literally burned to the bone, yet things around her did not ignite.
Not a foot away was a newspaper, unburnt, a big lighter, no other damage from fire to the room, to the area, just completely centralized in one spot.
Frank Oski knows his mother was a careless smoker and she had been seriously burned once before.
And on one occasion, I guess she fell asleep, and due to her drinking, the cigarette more or less landed on her abdomen, and it burnt a hole right in there. Not a deep one, but it did burn a hole. And she was so incoherent that she never realized that. But it never burnt her any further than, you know, say maybe a 2-inch radius, probably just about like this. So that's why I do not believe, you know, that a cigarette could have caused this.
I think you'll all agree that the choice of words of one of those interviewees is not the best when he says there are 2 limbs still lying there and a pile of newspapers not 1 foot away. Thank you so much. I knew in the end it might dawn. And a final example from this program is that of Helen Conway.
Mrs. Helen Conway, a 51-year-old widow, burned so quickly that more than 30 years after her death, fire officials are still puzzled.
She was babysitting 2 grandchildren.
Conway's granddaughter, Stephanie, was watching cartoons on the first floor. Mrs. Conway, an invalid, used a bell to call for help. She asked Stephanie to bring her up a book of matches. The child brought them and went back down to watch TV around 8:30 a.m. Mrs. Conway's next-door neighbor was going to church and saw a glow at the window. She ran over to the house and Stephanie answered the door. Because the heat was so intense, the neighbor could not make it to the top of the stairs, and she called the fire department.
When the firemen got there, the fire was out. The heat was there, the doorknob was red hot, the door itself was hot, and when they opened the door, the smoke that hit them was hot.
Here was a fire scene even more macabre than the Oski case. There in the corner were the remains of Mrs. Conway, as seen in this photograph taken in her sitting room.
When they arrived, they didn't have to put any water on the body or anything. It was out. There was smoke coming from the chair and so forth. But there was no flame, no nothing.
Interesting, isn't it? We're now getting more and more pointers to what happens. We have a person who is disabled, who is diabetic, and in the previous case, an alcoholic. We have people who smoke cigarettes. We have people who are asking for matches. We have a fire of immense intensity, but which doesn't last long. The door handle is red hot, and yet already the fire has gone out. It clearly is all fitting into a single, it's almost like a syndrome. And these accounts don't conflict with each other. They begin to build up a pattern. The case of Mrs. Conway, if you'd like to look at the police photograph in a little more detail, you can see it here, but also, of course, more clearly on the big screen. The whole situation is interesting because you can see, can't you, that her limbs are entirely undamaged. And the stuff that's nearby, this is a wooden table which hasn't caught fire. There's a huge amount of heat generated here, but there isn't flame that's damaged the rest. Here is an interesting case, and a well-known one, of Dr. John Irving Bentley, who died at the age of 92. His family came to see him and left him. He lived in Pennsylvania. He was in perfectly good spirits. And the following morning, a meter reader came around to the house. He found that burning had gone on inside, and there was an unmistakable odour, a sweet, oily odour, he said, as they were trying to fire up a central heating boiler that's been out of use for some time. Burning oil, that's another little pointer. How about the case that Tony McMunn reported of this unnamed woman in the north of England in 1980? Now, again, near the fire. And again, the legs entirely intact, but the body has been completely destroyed. There's a famous French case from Eurofin in France. This is the photograph that you normally see, and that's the photograph that's available online. In fact, the original photograph is much sharper and much more detailed. It gives a very vivid impression of the way in which the body has been destroyed. All bones have gone. They've been reduced to greyish calcined powder, and yet there isn't damage to what lies around other than immediate fire damage. It really is quite an extraordinary phenomenon. And people have had difficulty in trying to rationalize it and explain it.
The point of origin of the energy that consumes the victim appears to originate in the torso, in the center part of the body, and radiates outward, much like a human fireball.
Where does the intense heat come from? How does a fire consume a body and not consume the whole building, or even ignite combustibles inches away?
And that, of course, is the most interesting thing of all, the fact that combustibles that are quite near are not ignited. The BBC's QED programme, which started off so well, in fact devoted itself to disproving that there was anything unusual about it.
The scientific explanation, the wick effect, proposes that in certain rare circumstances a human being can burn like a candle. Here, a special inside-out candle has been made. Instead of running through the middle, the cotton wick is wrapped around the wax. This represents a clothed human being. Once the wick is set alight, the body fat starts to melt and liquefy, seeping into the clothing. The melted fat then becomes the fuel source, and the victim burns slowly over many hours.
Previous experiments have been rather trivial. They've demonstrated that it's possible to burn body fats on a wick. But what we don't understand at the moment is the precise conditions under which the bones can be reduced to a dust or an ash.
Dr. Drysdale's own experiments with animal bone have shown that even after being left in a furnace for over 12 hours, there is relatively little damage. It was clear that there were serious problems with the wick effect as a complete scientific explanation for spontaneous human combustion.
There are lots of problems with it. Firstly, the fact that even after 12 hours, this bone hadn't been destroyed. Secondly, it's already very well building a model of an inside-out candle, but the wick burns down as the wax burns down. That's what candles do. That doesn't happen in a human body. There is no evidence here at all of violent, fierce burning, but just a gentle, flickering candle flame. The programme did, though, take a sort of a human-sized pig, cover it with a blanket, and then set fire to that in order to see if they could simulate spontaneous human combustion.
The carcass is wrapped in a blanket to provide a wick. A small amount of petrol is poured on the blanket. Dahan expects this to produce a large initial flame, but one which will die down in minutes as the petrol burns away. The wick effect should then begin to take over. The burning is constantly monitored and recorded. As predicted, the petrol flared off within 2 minutes. But as these pictures show, an hour and 25 minutes later, the carcass is still burning, fueled only by the pig fat. These are the first pictures of a full-scale wick effect experiment. They show how the body fat is liquefying and is absorbed into the clothing, causing slow and localized burning with flames less than 1.5 feet high. 3 hours into the experiment, and the pig is still burning. A temperature reading is now going to be taken.
We measured a flame temperature of over 800 degrees from an area where the pig fat was the major fuel that was burning. It's clearly the same sort of range as we might get in a crematorium.
After 5 hours of continuous burning at 800 degrees Celsius, something extraordinary has started happening to the bones. They are being destroyed.
This shows very clearly that the bone here has been reduced to a state where it will crumble into a powder. And I think it's the first time it's been demonstrated that bones can be affected in this way from a fire that's been started from the burning of the clothing.
Because bone marrow is 80% fat, wick effect combustion slowly releases this fat as a further fuel source. So here, the body is being destroyed from within.
I think the wick effect can probably cause more damage to the human body over a period of 5 to 10 hours than can happen in a crematorium, because the high temperatures are actually produced in the bone itself.
In essence, the experiment has been very successful. In fact, it worked considerably better than I thought it would, because we were able to sustain combustion throughout the carcass for now going on 6.5 hours. And fire damage in the room is moderate.
The scientists have clearly demonstrated how the classic features of a spontaneous human combustion case can occur through normal processes.
This type of fire is a slow-burning, localized fire. It is a smoulder, perhaps a neighbour who walks past and then walks past 6 hours later. We'll see that a window that was transparent is now blackened. But it doesn't attract attention in the way that the more conventional house fire does.
Everything that those scientists are saying can be falsified. It is demonstrably ridiculous science, and I am ashamed to think it was ever broadcast. It is not the case that the fat melts into the clothes. The clothes burn away within minutes, and there then is no more wick. It is the case that after 12 hours of combustion, that pig's carcass is still a pig's carcass. It is the case that the bones are still bones, even if they're partly calcined. It is the case that the temperature of 800 degrees is nowhere near the temperature in a crematorium. This is burning that lasts much, much longer than the reported cases. Not only that, but there is muddled conception going on here, in the sense that you see a guy say that the marrow in the bones contains fat and itself acts as a fuel because the fuel is coming from inside the bones. That's falsified in a number of ways. Firstly, most bones don't contain marrow. Secondly, the ones that do don't contain much fat. And thirdly, the ones that do contain fat inside the bones. It only becomes fuel when it's liquefied and come outside the bone, since a fuel needs oxygen in which to burn, and there is no oxygen inside the bones. So the fuel is not burning inside the bones, as the man says. The accounts, those scientific accounts, are nonsensical. And yet, because of the politeness that we always give to such experts on TV, no one ever troubled to query the conclusions.
Home Office pathologist Professor Mike Green does not believe in spontaneous human combustion, but he has no doubt that these fires are very unusual.
When the policeman walked into the house, this is what he saw. There's no soot staining. It looks a perfectly clean, tidy house, but he can see the pair of legs sticking out. And once he walked into the room, this is what met his eyes, a pair of undamaged lower legs, but the remaining part of the body, the upper body, has been almost completely consumed.
I've never seen anything like that. If a body's been in a fire, what would you expect? The whole body would be burnt, rather than just stopping at a distinct point like I'd done there.
The first time one sees it, or even when one sees it more than once, you stop and rock back on your heels and say, how is it that this body has been totally consumed and nothing else has been damaged? It beggars belief. The way the body burns, the so-called wick effect, to me and to my colleagues, seems to be the most scientifically credible hypothesis.
So he doesn't believe in
Fire investigator
nor do the
Pat
Americans.
Kennedy believes spontaneous human combustion is a myth. He begins to unravel the Oski fire by looking at the possible source of its fuel.
Well, the human body is not particularly combustible, but the fat, animal fat, is combustible. In fact, it melts, turns to a liquid, and burns as what we call an ignitable liquid.
Dr. Steve Novella of the Connecticut Skeptical Society reasons that Mrs. Oski burned like a candle.
A human body can be thought of as a candle inside out, where the fat is on the inside and the wick is the clothing which is worn on the outside.
To demonstrate the candle effect, pork fat is placed in a bag made from the leg of a child's cotton blend sweatsuit. The heat from the burning cloth melts the fat, which oozes through the open weave.
Even the bones of the body do contain a large amount of fat. There is bone marrow within the bones, and this, again, can fuel the complete combustion.
A fire is similar to a human being in that it needs 15 to 16% oxygen to survive. Skeptics have theorized that Mrs. Oski's body fat burned like a candle, and that the fire extinguished because of the lack of oxygen.
The idea that a body can burn like a candle isn't such a far-fetched one at all. In a way, a body is like a candle. You can produce local high temperatures by means of the wick effect and a combination of smouldering and flaming to generate the temperatures necessary to reduce even bones to ash. At relatively low temperatures, at about 500 degrees centigrade, given enough time, the bone will in fact come down to something approaching a powder. The experiment we're going to carry out here simply involves putting an animal bone in a muffle furnace at just over 500 degrees centigrade, and the intention is to leave it for about 8 hours and observe what happens to it. Well, the bone has certainly changed markedly in appearance. It's white on the surface and looks quite friable. And over a period of 12 hours or so, it is quite likely that the bone would smoulder slowly enough to reduce it to a powder. I believe that the combination of the wick effect and the involvement of the bone, which could act as a wick itself, giving a smouldering process, will give rise to sustained severe burning of the bone itself, accounting for the type of damage that has been attributed to the so-called spontaneous human combustion.
Now notice what he's saying. This has burned for 8 hours, far longer than these human combustion cases. Well, and the bone is still solid. And what he is saying is that it's quite likely that after, say, 12 hours it would become friable. But he hasn't proved it. And even 12 hours simply doesn't fit the facts. You will, however, like this, and I do want you to pay special attention to the way in which computer models, early computer models written in ASCII code, were used to help to enlighten the case. We laugh now, but just think how much the youngsters in this room are going to laugh at our modelling in another generation or two.
At first sight, this picture does look rather mysterious. We've got television damaged in the right-hand side, and although there's a lot of smoke staining, nothing else seems to have been damaged by the heat. We have a computer model which will allow us to find out what type of fire produced this type of damage. Ah, right, this is very interesting because the computer program is telling us that at 260 seconds the oxygen level in the room was reduced to 16%.
To test his computer prediction, Stan Ames attempted to recreate the same type of smouldering fire that took place in Southampton, using an armchair to represent the burning body, set up in a room with low levels of oxygen.
Right, that seems to be burning. We can get out of the way now. Now we can watch the fire through this window and follow it with a specially designed infrared camera.
The most important feature of this experiment is to demonstrate that the smouldering process could sustain itself long enough to reduce a body to ash, or in this case, the armchair to its springs.
The chair has burned almost to completion. There are black marks up the wall where the fire has occurred, deposits of oily material on the ceiling, broadly speaking the kind of damage we'd have predicted from our computer model. So really this is broadly what we expected to find. It can all be explained in terms of ordinary physics and chemistry.
The program was determined to force the viewer to conclude that everything could be explained through conventional science. I've rarely seen more mendacious science on television. Firstly, they're substituting a highly inflammable chair for a manifestly non-inflammable person. And secondly, he is saying the chair is almost destroyed. The BBC say that it reduces the chair almost to its springs. I took the precaution of taking frame stills from the programme and putting them together to show you. Now, that is not a chair that's been reduced to its springs. It has not been burnt almost to completion. what was said is totally untrue. And I do like this specially designed infrared camera, as though it's different from all the others with which we are conversant. So let's begin to try and analyze this. The reason that this program is so wrong is because a person doesn't burn and a chair does. The human body isn't inflammable. The combustion times were ridiculous. They're talking about perhaps 12 hours of combustion times. There isn't any destruction of the body and there isn't any breakdown of bone. All of which, as we see, are the hallmarks of spontaneous human combustion. Now, we do need to distinguish between that and spontaneous combustion in nature. Piles of hay and grass will sometimes catch fire. A haystack will sometimes burn. If the hay is put down when it's a little too moist, microorganisms will grow. Their metabolic reactions are exothermic and they can sometimes actually cause fire. I remember seeing it when I was a child myself, that a haystack was smoking, and as they put in pitchforks and opened it, it burst into fire, because that was natural, spontaneous combustion, which is an accepted scientific fact. But that's not to be confused with spontaneous human combustion for two reasons. A human body isn't inflammable, but the hay is. So there's no mystery at all about why the hay burns. It burns because it's an inflammable substance. A body isn't. And there's no mystery about how, if a body was inflammable, it might catch fire, because you've got cigarettes, you've got matches, you've got a lighter, you've got a fire. There are loads of reasons. There is no mystery about how an inflammable person, if they were, could catch fire. The mystery in the human case is how the body would burn, because humans are not inflammable. Now, if we put those two together, you can see that part of the problem has always been this perplexity. How can a human start to burn? Some people have said, well, it can't be spontaneous, it must be static or a match. That doesn't alter the fact that the body is non-inflammable, and that is the key fact. If you look in Wikipedia, you can see a whole range of explanations put together. They point out that the body completely disappears, that the clothes are all burnt, that there is damage below the victim on the floor, and above the victim on the ceiling, that the extremities are usually undamaged. That's very important. That there isn't any fire accelerant, nothing like that, although sometimes they might have spilled whiskey. I wouldn't argue with that possibility. They're usually alone at the time of death, though not always. And the victims are often obese, they're unwell, or they're alcoholics. The range of theories is absolutely enormous. One was put forward by Carpenter, the eminent Victorian microscopist, who said handling phosphorus could possibly trigger the body into burning. Luminescence is an example. Overactive mitochondria has been put forward. Static electricity. Well, that might set fire to the body, but static can't burn the body. Divine intervention, which of course is linked to the moral sanctions being taken by God against alcoholics. And of course, ball lightning or other forms of lightning has often been put forward too. There are innumerable theories, but none of them fit the facts. And what do we know about the people? Well, it has been said that they're fat. True, okay. That they're mostly female. That's also true. That they're often alcoholic. Yes, that has also been the case. And that they are often cigarette smokers. But some of them are thin. Plenty of them are men, even if the majority are women. A lot of them abstain from alcohol and never touched a drink in their lives, or if they did drink, it was only very, very slightly. And a lot of them weren't cigarette smokers or indeed had any contact with matches. So if you're going to put forward an explanation, it's got to hold in all cases. You can't have exceptions to the rule. So what factor links the victims? 35 years ago, when I came up with my explanation for this, that's what I sat down to actually consider in my own mind. I thought, well, they're often overweight, they're often old, they're very often infirm, some are alcoholic, some are disabled, some, like the Parisian lady that Bartholin wrote about in the 1600s, were stressed, and often you get diabetics. Now, this is a range of pathologies, but the point is, they are all pathologies. In other words, all of them happen to ill people, to people who are not in the best state of health. Now, we have a simplistic view of metabolism. You know that if, for example, you take a sugar solution and ferment it, you end up with ethanol. That's not the case. If the solution is, if the fermentation process is stressed, other organisms will take over, and you'll end up instead with acetaldehyde. And in exactly the same way, we all know how the body works in its nice, happy, aerobic state, but when the body is stressed, then metabolism changes, and we develop contingent metabolic pathways that are not overtly evident in healthy people. And one of them produces a highly inflammable substance, acetone. Ketone bodies, like acetone, are produced by diabetics, by fat people, by people who over-exercise and over-indulge in sport. It is a symptom of a great many illnesses. When children teethe, if you pick up your little baby when the baby is teething, you're quite likely to smell acetone on the breath. Incidentally, that leads me to one point I want to mention to all of you. In the Western world, we're all told that teenagers are liable to solvent abuse. And everybody's told that the best way to test whether your child is a victim of solvent abuse is if the behaviour is abnormal and you can smell solvents on the breath. Poor little bastards. A teething baby will have solvents on its breath. Any child that is not very well is liable to produce a state of ketosis, of metabolic ketosis, and to smell of acetone. My heart goes out to the hundreds of thousands of families that have been wrecked by parents believing that because they can smell acetone, a solvent, on the breath of their child, the child is a glue sniffer. It's absolute nonsense. And I'm horrified to think that I stand here in this room telling you this, and the world of medicine is saying exactly the opposite, in spite of the fact that what they're saying is manifestly untrue. And so last year, I published my theory that ketosis provides an answer. I'd done no experiments, but nobody had ever, in thousands of years, found any way in which the body could become inflammable. Justice von Liebig in 1851 pointed out that it couldn't be the then fashionable cause of alcoholism that lay behind it, because, he said, we store our anatomical specimens in 70% alcohol, and they do not burn. He injected alcohol into living rats until they died, and tried to set fire to the poor little creatures, and they didn't burn either. So from 1851 onwards, von Liebig said, even with 70% alcohol in the tissues, they are not inflammable. Acetone, however, is highly inflammable and just could have an interaction with fat in the body. And so I said in an extract of the article that Michael Flaherty was indeed a diabetic. And disordered metabolism does cause the production of ketone bodies like acetone, which could form a reserve in the fatty tissues of the body and collect in gaseous form in the clothing, where static or a match could set fire to it. If you use acetone in your work, you will look at the label and see that it says, avoid any static sparks, because you'll cause an explosion if you don't. And so, in March this year, I thought it would be interesting just to run a couple of preliminary experiments to see if anything happened. So I took a piece of fat, a piece of beef fat, and I soaked it in neat alcohol, neat ethanol for 10 days, and then we tried to set fire to it. And this is what happened. We haven't set anything up special here. This is just a quick and dirty experiment, just to see whether in fact you could set fire to a hunk of animal fat which has been soaked completely in alcohol. As you can see, it doesn't have fire. It becomes pleasantly barbecued under the influence of the flame. And where the flame has hit it, it goes a little bit brown and discoloured. And I may tell you that the browning of the fat, the charring of the fat, and the heady, evanescent aura of alcohol did create an extraordinarily appetizing result. But what about the wick effect? I mean, you saw the wick effect with the pig, where they chucked half a gallon of gasoline on it, and naturally it went up. So what we did was to take another of these little portions and wrapped it up in gauze, and I put a few drops of ethanol on it. And you can see how the ethanol catches fire immediately. It looks as though it's going to start to burn, but after a very short while, the flame stumbles and stutters, and the burning starts to go out. And so I thought, well, we must give it a fair chance. So after the flame had actually disappeared altogether, we tried to relight it just to see if it would burn, and it wouldn't. no matter what we did, it was impossible to set fire to a piece of animal fat even when completely soaked in alcohol. And then came the acetone experiments. I had surmised that acetone might form a kind of a loose chelated body, if you like, a lipid acetonate, in quotes, which could possibly be highly inflammable. It just seemed to me to be an a priori argument that was worth testing. So we tested some pork fat in some acetone for a week and then brought a flame close to it, and you can see what happens. Notice, firstly, that the flames are intense. Notice, secondly, that much of the flames have a blue colour, and many of the eyewitnesses said the flames are blue. Also notice that there are jets shooting out. Yes, like a blowtorch, exactly as the man said, and many of the other accounts have said. These sequences have been shortened. We have one with actual time code on it for you to see in just a little moment. But within about 5 minutes, this had burned away to about a fifth of its original size and had been reduced to ash, just like those poor people. And the next day, after it had cooled down, what did we see? But that great pool of fat, which everybody said they had seen soaking into the carpet. The stills that we took show very clearly the blowtorch-like jets shooting out as the witnesses had themselves described. And so I thought it was time that we took some pork abdomen, which is a mixture of fat and conventional tissue, and we would make a scale model person, which we would dress and put into a room environment. This is the parlour in my home, or I'll rephrase that. This is a picture of the parlour in my home. And we would then set fire to this person. My grandson George came to help me, and after we dressed the little body in the infused tissues, you could smell acetone very strongly, and I thought to myself, well, whatever we're going to have to do here, we won't have to drop a little bit on to set fire to it, and you'll see how rapidly and immediately the acetone vapour took fire. So this incidentally is a carpet sample on which one of these experiments had taken place, and you can see how the carpet is damaged where the body was, but it's not damaged elsewhere. So this was body number 1. This was specimen A, and we thought we would therefore give him a name. You need to name your specimens. And so what you are going to see is the destruction of Alex.
Whoa.
Now you see the initial burning, for a matter of half a minute or so, is the acetone vapour. But in next to no time, the very fact that the tissues are infused with acetone causes them to start to burn. And in next to no time, poor Alex is dead in front of the fireplace. You can see the molten fat, exactly as the human cases that have been reported. And Alex was quickly destroyed. And here you've got total destruction, not 12 hours and you end up with a barbecued pig. I must say, I often wondered how they kept their knives and forks off that pig. It must have smelt delicious. But at the end of the 12-hour period, it still looked just like a pig. It wasn't destroyed at all, whereas Alex has vanished. Indeed, the heat was so great that with a loud bang, the tile exploded. But we leapt out of our skins when it did. So here you've got the 2 portions of the ceramic tile blown apart. And within 10 minutes or so, Alex had entirely disappeared. And you were left with a pile of blackened ash exactly consonant with what the eyewitnesses had said that they themselves had observed. And so we brought them together, these pieces of tile, and you can see how the heat, the tremendous heat there, had actually shattered this thick ceramic tile, and yet the carpet alongside is untouched. Again, exactly as the eyewitnesses had said. So we also realised it would be quite useful to create a model head, again out of plaster of Paris and cut to scale. And so our second victim was destroyed, poor Betty. This is in our This is a digital photograph of our sitting room as a backdrop. And this time, Betty actually had hands nicely carved in order to look real. And once again, she caught fire very easily, and within minutes is a roaring inferno. Any person in this situation would suffer vagus shock and would probably be dead within a matter of seconds. But you can see how Betty burns away fiercely. And again, there's no spread of the fire, but Betty herself is burning merrily all the time. And indeed, the way in which the head burns leaves a sort of a charred skull. And in many of these cases, they said how the cranium was left there, though there was no tissue on it anymore, of course. Notice now that Betty has fallen off. The chair, which is made of softwood, it's made of pine, hasn't even burned. And again, Betty's legs are not burning when the rest of Betty had. But in fact, the flames from Betty's burning body actually rise and set fire after she's been destroyed. They then set fire to the chair. This isn't the chair burning and catching fire to the person, as the television documentaries that are experts have often tried to allege. This is actually the burning person setting fire to the chair. They burn so quickly that the chair, in this case, hasn't even had time to catch fire. It's really quite extraordinary. So the police would be faced in a case like this with finding the charred remains of the chair lying on top of the person, and doubtless would have said that this person had tried to hide from the fire by burrowing under the chair. But that was the remains of Betty, and again, she entirely was reduced to ash in a very short period of time. This is the carpet. Again, no damage at all around, but completely destroyed there. So we thought it was now time properly to do a timed model, and so once again this will be edited down, but because we have a digital clock in the background, you can easily see how the elapsed time is. And within 5 minutes, Clara's abdomen, though not her legs, Clara's abdomen has been entirely destroyed. She is sitting in an elegant breakfast room, marred only by the fact that there is a large scientific digital clock nailed to her radiator. And as you can see, you can imagine that she might have dropped a cigarette and is immediately so shocked at the fact. Remember that we've got hot gases here all around the head. The lungs will be instantly seared. Any inhalation would cause the most excruciating pain, and that kind of painful trauma is just what causes vagus inhibition and would cause a person to lose their consciousness extremely quickly. But again, you can see the elapsed time, which is just half a minute, and she is already burning fearsomely. 1¼ minutes, and she's beginning to be destroyed. And do remember that this isn't a question of scaling up. If a 1 kilogram body burns in 20 minutes, a 70 kilogram body is not going to burn in 20 times 70 minutes. It's not arithmetic. I mean, if you set fire, for example, to a spoonful of gasoline, it'll burn in a couple of seconds. You do a bucketful of gasoline, it'll burn in a few more seconds, but not in ratio of the two volumes. So my contention is that a person, although they would take longer to burn than these models, won't take that much longer. And again, you can see the fat is running out of the body, and because of the radiant heat of the conflagration above, it is, and at 5 minutes, she is mostly destroyed, apart from the extremities, and she falls to the floor. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that these are quantifiable experiments. What I am saying is that entire documentaries have been made about rubbish, that scientists have stood there and explained how they know the answer when they don't. And all I'm saying to you today, as you look at this pitiful sight, just after 11 minutes of her dropping her cigarette into her lap, this poor ketotic woman becomes just a pile of glowing ash. And what I have shown you today is at least one metabolically sound model which does fit the facts. None of the others has ever fitted the facts, and at least for your satisfaction this one does. And as you can see, within a quarter of an hour or so, the fire has almost gone out. They said in the human cases that within half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, the fire had gone out, and you're left with an oily mass of smoking, charred cinders. This is exactly what it is that the eyewitnesses said they have found, and within 16 minutes, the person has been entirely destroyed. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I put forward to you the view that not necessarily that this even causes it. This is the only time any scientist has ever shown something that could explain it. And I believe that after years of being told we had answers when we didn't, that I've been able to give you a viable answer this evening to the terrible demise of people who die of spontaneous human combustion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.